Well, says it loaded. And we are on Facebook, or we're on YouTube at least. I haven't seen it pop up on Facebook yet. But let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to everyone who's tuning in. My name's Tyler Miller. I run the Liberty at All Hazards Facebook page and website. And we are here having a discussion with State Representative from the 19th Legislative District, Jim Walsh. Jim, thank you for joining us today.
It's good to talk to you again, Tyler. How you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. How was your Independence Day?
Oh, it was great. The biggest parade kind of event we have in my area around the 4th is the Longview Go Forth Parade. And I walk it every year. It's a long one. It's 3 miles long. Goes all through the streets of Longview. And normally it has a pretty good turnout, 25,000 people be lined up along the parade route. And this year they think it was more than that. It looked like it was maybe 35,000. So it was a big crowd. People were coming from all around because they know it's a big event. And
Right.
I think it just drew people in because people were itching to have a regular 4th of July this year. And we saw that all over the place. We saw that last night where a lot of people celebrated well.
Yeah, no, we saw that here where I was at in Bremerton, where most of the official fireworks from the city were all canceled, but you wouldn't be able to tell that with the number of fireworks that people were lighting off, and people were just saying, you know what, we are free and independent, and we're going to celebrate that, and that was really awesome to see.
And I think people used common sense. I mean, there's some concern about the dry weather, and I think people were smart about that. But there are places where you can do it without such a risk to starting a fire like that. And I think people were pretty aware and pretty smart about what they did, and still had a good time.
I agree. I didn't see anybody being stupid. I did see some people, having fun in very boyish ways, but I think people were, like you said, handling it were being very safe in their freedom. So the discussion that we're here to have, obviously, there was a big kerfuffle a couple days ago over the issue of symbology and how you used a symbol at an event, a political event. And if you want to just, for people who may not know what the details of that, can you just give a quick summary of what happened there?
Sure. There was an event a couple weeks ago now, put on by a group called Washingtonians for Change, which is a conservative leaning group that wants to see, particularly at the state and statewide levels, some new blood. And they've been doing a number of events. They do monthly events all around the state. This one was in Lacey, Washington, which is a little suburb a little north of Olympia. And I've spoken and participated, not at all of their events, but at a number of them. And I agreed to be at this one too and speak. And while we were there, I should say that Washingtonians for Change, like a lot of grassroots organizations, is kind of a loose affiliation of a number of smaller groups. So you got people there who are interested particularly in tax issues. You got people there who are considered focused on gun rights. You got people there who are considered they're worried about homelessness and crime issues. So it's kind of an umbrella group of a lot of smaller groups that have particular focuses. And one of the subgroups that was there, one of the smaller groups, was a group that was there to, from their perspective, they were trying to, with a lot of what's going on in the news lately, they were there to advocate for the support of the state of Israel and sort of a pushback against some of the perceived biases that they perceive in the media and other places that favor Palestine and the political organization Hamas. So they were there. I mean, it was, like I say, it was a bunch of different groups, but the one group was there particularly interested in that. They asked people to put on their shirts or jacket lapels uh, Stars of David that they felt represented a symbol of a sort of solidarity with Israel and uh, sort of a common humanity, and that overlapped with issues that some of us have made about concerns of our fundamental liberties and our rights in this state and the nation being undermined in a way that is concerning to us and has historical precedents, ugly historical precedents.
Yep.
So there was a little bit of a, I guess you'd call it a sort of Venn diagram overlap of these. Um, Against my better judgment, I agreed to put one of their Stars of David symbols on my shirt. I then proceeded to give a speech toward the end of the session, the event, uh, where I talked about my concerns about infringements on fundamental liberties and constitutional rights in the state. I did not make in my speech any explicit connection between uh, any historical action and our current situation in Washington state. But I was there with this symbol pinned to my shirt. And a couple of people took video and photos of my speech during the event. And those photos circulated. And I was I expected some backlash, but I did not expect the degree of backlash that followed. And I spoke to a few of people whose opinions I respect, and they told me that they thought the symbol was too much, that it went too far, and it didn't make any point of solidarity or common humanity. It didn't make any point about historical problems when people resign their rights and their liberty, and that the symbol just overwhelmed that message.
Right.
And I made a few phone calls to some people who are public figures. And the radio talk show Jason Rance is someone I respect, and I talked with him about it. Likewise, another media person, Ari Hoffman, I spoke with him, and I respect his opinion too. I spoke with a couple of people who are not public figures, so I don't want to say their names, but they're private people whose opinions I respect. They also said it was just too much. It overwhelmed the message you were trying to deliver in your speech. And when I'd spoken to them, I realized that they were right, that it had overwhelmed the message I was trying to deliver. And as an image, and as a symbol, it is just so offensive to more than a few people. And I'd made a mistake in doing it. And so I went on Rance's talk show, on his radio show, and we had a discussion. And in the course of that discussion, of course, I made a public apology about using the symbol in a way that was, it was offensive to people, and that's a fact. It was, and that it really kind of wrecked my message, which is not the point. And I was hoping it would help underscore the message, but it's just such a potent symbol, the Star of David, that it didn't help the message. It ended up hurting it and getting lost. And so it is truly a lesson in what you might call symbology. Some people call it semiotics, the kind of study, the philosophy, and some psychology of symbols and what they mean beyond their immediate meaning, what their secondary, tertiary, other meanings have. And you can think you're doing one thing with a symbol and find out that you're doing the opposite. And that was the lesson that I learned.
Right. And that's really the big issue. And I think from my perspective, the thing that struck me the most when I heard your apology on Jason's show and everything was that, I actually saw it in the Seattle Times article that came out even before that, that it was clear to me that they were seizing upon this opportunity to crucify you over the optics, the chosen optics of the situation, rather than the content of what you were actually saying. And that's one of the reasons that I did want to have you have this discussion, is how, because we see that in so many areas of politics right now, where iconography, symbology, images are utilized in various ways, and often hypocritical ways, by various groups, and the effect is to not ever deal with the substance of what the group is doing. Either you attack the use of the symbol, so that you can't hear the good content of the message, or the content of the message is being overlaid with incorrect usage of symbology. For 4 years, we heard nothing from the left except Trump is Hitler, Trump is Hitler, Trump is Hitler. And now, and that was to suppress the good message that Trump was trying to get out to everybody. Now you have a good message warning of, overreach by the state, stuff that's very concerning and has real parallels. And they're seizing on optics that had nothing to do with that message in order to suppress the message that you actually had. Is there anything about the apology, or about the message that you wanted? I think you already kind of clarified it, but is there any aspect of it that you felt still is unresolved or hasn't really been conveyed to people, that you'd like to try to just set straight, as far as what the apology was for in the first place?
I think I've covered it pretty well several times,
Okay.
Tyler. I mean, I shouldn't have used the symbol in the way I did. I mean, I don't like giving offense to people I respect. I like maintaining their respect and persuading them when we disagree. And and the symbol was just too strong. It's too potent. It's too much, and it drowned out the message. Um, I've left one of the recordings of the speech up on my social media page, one of them, for the very reason I want people to hear what the speech was. There's so much that happens, Tyler, so much. When a story like this gets swept up into the mainstream media, the imprecision of a lot of what some people say is just amazing. It's stunning. I mean, you'll hear people say things like, your speech was anti-Semitic. Well, no, my speech didn't touch on anything related to Jewish people or Jewish history or anything. Didn't speak to that matter in any way. All those people saw was the symbol, and they didn't hear the words in the speech. And and this isn't just know nothings on, bickering on Twitter or Facebook. This was some mainstream media outlets who get it wrong.
Right.
But that's on me. That's on me, because I used a symbol that was so potent, so strong, so meaningful. They are overwhelmed. They're not listening to the message. And that's the real problem. I mean, that's the real risk from my perspective. If you use the wrong symbol, your message gets lost, and people can interpret the symbol however they wish. The organization that was giving the star pins out meant for it to be a sign of solidarity with Israel. Yet the bulk of the mainstream media took it as somehow the opposite. So when you are dabbling in symbols, when you're using symbols, you have to realize that they can mean vastly different things to different people. And it's in that way, it's not precise. Symbols are not precise. I think we can make our words more precise, but we have to be really careful about the symbols we use, because they're not as specific as our words.
I completely agree. I guess I'm approaching it from a perspective. I have a master's in history, and so I tend to look at symbols as being context driven. When are you using the symbol? How are you using the symbol? And what are you actually talking about? And because I look at it, I think that both the image of solidarity with the yellow star but also the comparisons that have been made um, with COVID restrictions and government overreach are completely appropriate because I've studied the history on it. But as you were saying, we can't always rely on everyone to have the same understanding of that symbol that we do or that a lot of people do. Um, so knowing that and knowing especially how conservatives are always going to be treated in the mainstream media with this type of material, um, should we be shying away from using imagery that is appropriate no matter how controversial it may be or how misunderstood it may be? Should we be shying away from it if it actually is the right image and actually does have the right uh, context behind it?
Well, the context is key, Tyler. I mean, that's the whole issue. Is it's hard to control the context. A lot of the mainstream media that's reported on this speech from a couple weekends ago, they got the context totally wrong. But again, that's on us. We have to understand that the context is like the first casualty of mainstream media coverage. They will lose context first. And they couldn't, I think a lot of the media outlets just couldn't resist the image of someone wearing one of the Star of David pins. And they didn't really care about the context. They didn't
Right.
care that what someone intended it to be. They didn't care what the focus of the event was. They had an image that was powerful, and they ran with it. And so I wouldn't say we need to shy away from using symbols, but we need to tread very carefully. In my case, I should have realized that the Star of David symbol is so powerful that it has the runs the risk of just making people deaf to the words you're using and the message you're trying to deliver. And I just screwed up. I mean, I
Right.
misanalyzed how potent the symbol is and how much it would overwhelm everything else.
Right.
And but I don't think you should shy away from symbols altogether. I think, if you use them carefully, they can amplify your message. And I guess I would say they can amplify the message both to the positive and to the negative. I mean, we everybody wants symbols to work to their favor, but it's difficult to be sure they will. So use them carefully and really use them only when you're absolutely certain that they'll help your cause, not
Right.
become the message. I mean, this gets into stuff that famous writers like Marshall McLuhan, the famous Canadian philosopher, wrote about. Daniel Boorstin, the famous American historian. Boorstin wrote a famous book called The Image. And I should have remembered that book when I was at this event a couple weekends ago. And Boorstin's whole point, well, Boorstin's a famous guy. He was the Librarian of Congress for years, and he wrote a series of pretty influential, although not very well known books that were kind of, I guess they were sort of popular histories, but they've influenced a lot of media. They influenced Marshall McLuhan and others. Boorstin came up with some famous kind of pithy quotes. He came up with the famous line, "A celebrity is someone who's famous for being famous."
Right.
Um, and he, in his book, The Image, he analyzed how press conferences and press releases shape the news, not only in the facts of the news, but in the frame of the news, in the symbolic and other meaning, imagery of the news. And what today people call like the Overton window, which is how an issue is framed in popular notions. Boorstin talked about things like that. And I should have remembered my Daniel Boorstin book, The Image, and I would have thought twice about the star.
Well, we all wish we had better hindsight in our foresight.
Truly.
So I mean, but again, for people who are still having a hard time understanding this. It'd be like trying to use the swastika in a context of talking about Hindu religion or Buddhist religion, where that is actually a sacred symbol in the religious context. If you go, you can see Buddhas with it, and the Nazis, of course, stole that imagery, repurposed it, and now we only know it in that context. But if you have an event where you're going to talk about that and all you put on your flyer is the swastika, you're probably not going to get the right context around the event that you're trying to have. So people
That's
need to
right.
understand.
That's right. If
Yeah,
you're a Hindu person or a Buddhist, you might naively think that was appropriate, but you'd end up with a whole controversy that goes beyond anything you'd be trying to say. Eh,
exactly. And that's I think that the real point that I hope that more conservatives and Republicans, especially in the public sphere, take away from this is that, especially in the wake of Trump, and I'm not bashing Trump in any way when I say this, people loved his in your face. He went out and did stuff. Consequences be damned. Not everyone can pull that off, and not everyone can pull it off the way that he does. And he, for better or worse, didn't always pull it off successfully. He got bashed in the media. He was constantly fighting back against that kind of stuff. And I think that conservatives would be wrong to say that we want to adopt that in your face all the time. We're going to try to control the narrative mentality, because I don't think that that's a winning formula yet. Not with the mainstream media still set up the way that it is. We don't have the ability to control that narrative. So, like you were saying, we can't set that context, and we certainly can't control it after the fact. I mean, if this isn't a good example of not being able to control the context of what's going on, I don't know what is. Because, like you said, the speech had nothing to do with the star. The event really had nothing to do with the star. It was an add-on to the event that you were talking to, and you lose that context. And once that context is lost, especially if the people who are covering it have an agenda of their own and want to intentionally distort that context, there's nothing we can do to counter that.
well, we can avoid it,
Yeah,
and we can we know what we have is our ideas are stronger than the left's. Our ideals are fundamentally more sound given our constitution and the history and traditions of this country and the state. We know we're on the right side of philosophy and of law and of the social contract. Um, so I think we need to stick with those things. I think that's where we need to be. I think um, let the other side be more symbol driven.
right.
Um, and I think what happens is if we stick to what works, which is a philosophy of individual liberty, of self ownership, self actualization, self realization, and definition. Um, this is a message that transcends kind of lazy party lines, and we can grow outside of the traditional left-right bickering dialectic. We can do more, and I guess my advice to other conservatives and other liberty-minded people is, you know, don't, symbols are the tool of the other side. Don't try to out symbol them.
Right.
Let's use reason. Let's use logic. Let's use words, and I think that will be how we can be most persuasive. Um, there, you know, there are kind of two levels of what goes on, Tyler. I mean, there's the reality of how people I respect responded to the image that I created. And then there are a whole bunch of people who really don't know me. They don't know local facts. They don't know politics. They don't know philosophy. They're just jumpers. They just jump onto an issue.
Right.
And the jumpers are partisan. The jumpers are pushing agendas. And 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 that's when these issues, these controversies sort of get wind, is when you get all these jumpers who jump in. They don't give a damn about context. They don't care about the facts. They're there to make a point, and they'll make a point at all costs. And that's what you need to watch out for, is not giving the jumpers room to jump.
Yeah, I agree. And I'll throw myself under the bus a little bit and say that I've have at times, and maybe even in this a little, been a jumper, where I was reacting a lot rather than getting all of the information before reacting. Um, but I agree. We need to not we need to not be reactionary ourselves, and we also need to not give into and provide the ability for other people to be the reactionaries. Do you see any concern with this? So if we stay away from trying to out symbolize the left, I see attacks on other symbols that are well underway. The Gadsden flag is one that comes under constant attack. The Three Percenters as a group and as a symbol are constantly misrepresented and misunderstood. The American flag itself is
Yeah, the
trying.
American flag now they're trying to turn into a negative symbol. I mean,
Right.
the congresswoman posted that the American flag is a symbol of hatred. I just don't buy that.
Right. So how do we, um, with words, with ideas, and everything like that, we want to embrace the symbols that we still have, and we feel the necessity to defend them. How can we effectively do that without falling into the trap of trying to out symbolize? Do you have any suggestions on that?
Go back to first things. Go back to first things. And you hear someone like this congresswoman saying that the American flag is a symbol of hate. Well, I mean, what do you mean by hate? And question, make them check their premises, make them define their terms, because they get away because they are so picture driven, they are so visually driven, emotionally driven, symbolically driven. They don't often check their own premises. They don't ask themselves what do their first things mean. And let's just hold them when you hear that kind of thing. Act like a college professor. Act like Socrates. Ask the Socratic question. What does that mean?
Right.
What does it mean when someone says a flag is the symbol of hate? What do they mean by hate? Make them explain how the flag is a symbol of hate.
Yeah.
What you'll find often is not, and the congresswoman who's explaining her statement this weekend now is having trouble explaining what she means. They Someone asked recently one of the main proponents of critical race theory, this fellow named Kendi, who wrote this book called How to Be an Anti-Racist. He asked Kendi what he meant when he uses the term racist. Kendi is deeply invested in talking about racism and racism, people who are racist. And Kendi literally couldn't answer the question. He gave this circular question, or gave a circular answer. Well, racism, it's racist if it's based on racism. And he just found himself, you could tell he found himself stuck in a circle, and he couldn't answer. All he had was the circular logic. Well, A is A when it's A. Okay, well, that's not really an answer to the question, what does A mean? And so I think that's the kind of thing we have to look at. If you want, look up the video. It's all over the internet of this fellow Kendi not able to answer what he means when he uses the term racist.
Right.
And so I think that's where we're strongest, Tyler. That's where we can make our points best, when we make people check their premises, define their terms. We can do it. I can do it. I can define the terms that I use. I can explain why I think that segregating people based on whether they've had a COVID vaccine runs against our tradition in this country of finding that separating people and segregating people is not just. And I can go back to Plessy versus Ferguson, the notorious US Supreme Court decision that said separate but equal was just. And the law since then, up through Brown versus Board of Education, when our own states, US Supreme Court said the opposite. They said we were wrong before. Separate is inherently unequal. Right. Segregating people is inherently unfair. It is inherently unjust. And that's the side that we should be on. And we should remind those who claim that segregating people like that is separate but equal, that separate but equal is a concept we've rejected in this country and in this state.
Right. And of course the constant battle that we have is that people would say, well, now you're just misappropriating the civil rights movement, and you're now offending all of the colored people who went through all that struggle, because you're taking away their symbology, and using it for your own political purpose. And so to me, that really gets under my skin, this idea that we can't talk about that history, certain aspects of history, certain symbols are so sacrosanct that we can't ever talk about them and lay it out and say, well, what does the history actually say? What does the history actually mean? And how did events unfold? One of my biggest criticisms with Jason's interview with you, and some of the aftermath with it, is the nebulous way that they treat the Holocaust as this amorphic thing that only is the end result. That is that when you're talking about anything in reference to the Holocaust, then you are automatically getting right to the end result, of 6 million Jews dead. And what some of us like to say is, whoa, wait a second, it didn't start with that. There was a very long process that led to that. And I'd like to, rather than wait for it to get over here to this end result, I'd like to talk about some of the things that happened over here, because that's where I'm seeing some um, disconcerting parallels of dehumanizing people, of saying we can be separate, and separate but equal, of saying, well, if you have your papers in this regard, you have certain rights and privileges, and if you don't, then you don't have these rights and privileges. So that's one of my other concerns, and one of my fears with how this conversation goes, and with iconography and with history, is that people treat things so sacrosanct that we lose the ability to even understand why the symbol is important in the first place.
Well, there are some parallels, but the symbol, in this case, the Star of David, jumped right to the end, like you say. I mean, the symbol came from the worst depravity that occurred in Germany at that time, and Central Europe, and all of Europe, really. It jumped right to the end of the line, as you described it. And, in retrospect, I should have stayed focused on the front of the line, the earlier part of the line. And but truly, I mean, my speech didn't even talk about those parallels.
Right.
And I don't think you have to go to that example to be concerned about the erosion of fundamental liberties that we have here, that the separation of people, the requiring papers for transit or participation in public events. I mean, these are things that are inherently un-American and are inherently illiberal and anti-liberty. And, we can focus there. And I think we have to be compelling with logic and with words. And, occasionally you can use a symbol, but symbols they're kind of shortcuts.
Right.
Tyler,
Well,
they're kind of lazy. I mean, let's not
they
use
are.
them because they're shortcuts.
And
That's another reason.
I absolutely agree with that, because they are lazy, and the people who do like to use them as provocation, as stirring the pot of getting your blood boiling, getting you interested in whatever it is they want you to pay attention to. And I think that using symbols in that way is just as wrong as using them completely outside of the context that they actually occurred in. But you're absolutely right. When we're talking about picking our symbols, there's plenty of other examples of that state overreach. I mean, we can look at what happened in Soviet Russia. We can look at what happened in Cambodia. We can look at any communist example, any socialist example, where the state has assumed complete and total control over the autonomy of the human being. We can find plenty of examples throughout history where that power has been then translated into the worst aspects of our history as a human species, the worst catastrophes that we've endured. So again, it gets back to what you were saying earlier. We have to be very careful with how we present and how we choose what symbols we choose and how we choose to employ them, because the left is never ever going to give us a pass, not the way that it gives its own a pass. They're not going to cover us eating ice cream, over and over and over again, like they do with the former vice president.
Well, you're right. I mean, we have even more recently what happened in Cambodia with the Khmer Rouge regime and their leader Pol Pot.
Yep.
Hideous, just hideous what happened there. And it is that those things are the end of the slope. We aren't there. We don't have the killing fields they had in Cambodia here, but we're at the top of the slope. We're at the beginning of a slope. The good news is we haven't devolved into the kind of madness that became or other things have become. We're at the point where we can turn the course. We're not at the place where we're down. We've descended into mass murder and genocide. We're not there yet. It's true, we're not. But our disregard currently for individual liberty is the start in a bad direction. And so what I want to do, and the message I want to try to deliver, is the time is now to change our course. We need to get back onto a course that doesn't go in the direction of the complete denial of common humanity in people, that doesn't get anywhere near that. We can turn the course and get back to our fundamental values here, which put the individual liberty in foremost.
Absolutely.
Our state constitution says it plainly, Tyler, that the reason governments exist is to maintain and protect individual rights.
Yeah. You can't get much more clear than that. And even if you want to argue at the federal level that there's a different purpose, our state government is here to protect individual rights and preserve them. I think we've covered everything that I really wanted to. Is there anything more that you wanted to make sure that you convey to people who might be watching this, either about this specific instance or anything in the larger political picture that you're seeing unfold in the state right now?
Well, I think that the news is generally good. I think most people in the state are fed up with the radical left's effect on even moderate policymakers. I think people in the state are tired of it, and I think they want a return of the pendulum to the middle or even to the conservative side of it. I think we're going to hear in the coming months and couple of years a lot more about public safety, a lot more about crime, a lot more about getting people off the streets, a lot more about protecting property rights and the family's right and ability to thrive. I think the messages we're going to hear in this state in the coming months and years are going to be hopeful, are going to be returning to the middle and getting rid of some of the radical left rhetoric and policy. So I'm optimistic. I think the next couple of years are going to be great for Washington.
What do you see as the sleeper issue? One that people aren't necessarily paying attention to now, but it's going to come up either in the 2022 cycle or the next presidential cycle. What aren't people paying attention to that they maybe should?
Well, I'd say there are two issues that are like that. I'm not sure you could say people aren't paying attention to them. They're paying attention to them, but how much are they going to, will they have legs over the next couple of years? I think that this matter of critical race theory and whether it's being taught in our public schools or influencing what's being taught in our public schools, I think that's going to be an issue with real legs. The people that I hear who are the most concerned about it and its effect on our public schools are not your conventional conservatives or liberty people. They are, in many cases, proverbial lifelong Democrats who are really concerned about turning our public schools into ideological factories, and that's a good sign. It's a hopeful sign that people are looking at that from a non-traditional partisan way. They're just looking at it as people who want our schools to be effective. I think that's an issue is going to have legs. And then I think generally the question of business, and especially entrepreneurial business, and have we choked the state's great tradition of encouraging and welcoming entrepreneurial business startups? Have we choked off that real engine of wealth that we've had in Washington, from Boeing to Microsoft to Amazon, generations of really creative entrepreneurial businesses that have built industries,
Right.
based starting here? Have we killed the ability to get the next Amazon? Have we gumped up our tax system so badly here? Have we screwed up our quality of life and our cost of living so badly that the next Amazon is going to happen in Texas or Idaho or South Dakota or some other place? I think that's going to start to resonate with people too. I mean, we have a great quality of life in terms of natural resources here in the Pacific Northwest, but the real genius of the state of Washington was the business innovators that we've traditionally had here. And if we chased the business innovators away, I think that's going to have a real meaning to people in the months and years ahead.
I completely agree. So, well, thank you so much for joining us, taking the time on the day after the holiday, which is a holiday for some of us still. And I appreciate you taking the time. I'm sorry that you got roped into this media mill, but you're used to it at this point. You know, they they love to come with the slings and arrows at you any chance they can. So
Yeah, but this was one. I shouldn't have gotten into. I mean, I should have seen it coming. And if you're going to push, you're always going to push some limits,
yep.
and you're going to make a few mistakes. And this was a mistake, but we'll move on from it, and
Absolutely.
we'll make sure that we're keeping a light shined brightly in Olympia.
Absolutely. And with that, I will wrap it up. And everyone, thank you for tuning in on the Liberty at All Hazards page. If you made a comment or a question, we will scroll back through those later on. We'll try to respond to those in the comment section. We're not going to do it live here right now, but we thank everyone for tuning in, and maybe we'll have another discussion in the future.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day and a great week. God